Okay, so Martha, super excited to talk to you. Martha is the CEO of BiotiQuest, and I believe maybe another company that I'm forgetting. But your BiotiQuest is making probiotics, not just making, I guess, researching and developing probiotics that help potentially save people's lives and or improve health, cure diseases, etc., etc. So I'm super grateful for you finding time to talk to me. And let's just start by I would like you to just tell people, because most of my viewers might not be familiar with microbiome. It might be a very new concept for people. Could you just give a brief introduction of what it is and why it's important?
Sure. Well, the microbiome is the trillions of bacteria, fungi, and viruses that live in and on our body. And I say they function as our internal pharmacy to maintain our health. So they make vitamins, hormones, and neurotransmitters, and things like serotonin for brain health. Melatonin is made in the gut. The B vitamins, many of the B vitamins are made by bacteria in our gut. And they are digesting our food and providing us with bioavailable nutrients. Without our bacteria, we would not be very healthy. And with the wrong bacteria, we're not very healthy. And I think the research is now showing, at one point they thought that there were something like a ratio of 10 bacterial cells to 1 human cells. I think the ratio is now more like 2 bacterial or microbial cells to human cells, that ratio. So we're actually more microbial than we are human.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, this is so exciting because I think the old school thinking is like, it's sort of like a calorie for a calorie kind of thing. Whatever you eat, that's why they put all these labels on the food. But thinking about the microbiome, all those labels, food labels, most of them don't make any sense because it could be that the bacteria is making something completely new that's not on those labels at all. And interestingly, you mentioned serotonin, which I recently heard is like the happiness hormone, like the good happiness, not like the pleasure, like the dopamine, but like the kind of like I like it and I'm happy and I don't want any more. I'm just happy the way I am.
Right, and that flows down from oxytocin, which is one of the, I'll say, master regulators. Oxytocin and vasopressin are 2 hormones that sort of sit at the top of the cascade of those hormones. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for this introduction. So can you tell? I know you have your own story is very fascinating. I did look up a little bit yesterday. Look at some of your videos, but I don't want to spoil it. I want you to tell a little bit your story, how you got into this.
Sure. So my background is actually as a business turnaround systems expert to some degree. I studied accounting in college, which is kind of one of the original systems that has to balance. You have debits and credits, and if it doesn't balance, something's wrong. I came out of that and did consulting for a number of years, and I learned a process called transaction flow review, which is how you look at a business to identify the risk in a business. And you do that by drawing a map, a flow chart of what is flowing through the business, and you're looking for areas where some part of the system or process might have a breakpoint that's not working that identifies risk. And from that, I went on to have a successful career in business. And in 2002, my husband was 44 at the time. He was a marathon runner, seemingly in great shape, and was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And it didn't make sense to me. And so they kind of give you, they give you the diagnosis. They tell you that it's progressive. There's really nothing you can do. Here's some information, but good luck to you, sort of. And I came out of that and said, well, this seems like a systems process to me, and science and medicine is not approaching it that way. And so I took my sort of systems thinking and applied it to trying to understand the whole system of Parkinson's. And of course, if you're going to map out what's going on in the human body, the first things you look at are what's going through this pipe, which is, food and water. And so I studied for a number of years the food system that we had, and I changed our diet and went back to trying to cook everything fresh and looking for organic foods. But back in 2002, there was not so much organic food. So in that way, I started to study what is the food system that we have, how is it grown, what chemicals are used on it. And many of the, I learned in that process, many of the herbicides and pesticides that are used in agriculture were actually first used as chemical weapons in World War II as nerve agents. And so, I'm like, okay, well, why would we use a nerve agent on our food? So anyway, from that process, I continued to study on, chemistry, biochemistry, and the physiology and biology of the body, and on into Parkinson's. I've studied many, many different areas of science. And in 2014, I read a book by Dr. Martin Blaser called Missing Microbes. And his research was talking about the microbiome, which I had never heard of, and how growing up in the age of antibiotics, where they use antibiotics in animal feed, they overuse it in medicine, it's used in food, all these different, quote, anti-life products have impacted our microbiome, and so we've lost this diversity. And that to me made a lot of sense. I had talked to many people with Parkinson's who had, as they were growing up as children, had repeated strep infections and had taken a lot of antibiotics, or they had taken antibiotics for acne for a number of years. And so I started to study the microbiome, and I actually ended up investing in a small company called Pure Cultures that was looking at the animal microbiome. And a few months later, the first paper came out where they showed so Parkinson's has two primary phenotypes, or the way the symptoms present. People with Parkinson's either are tremor dominant, or they have a posture and a gait problem where they have trouble walking. And they could actually divide a cohort of people by looking at their microbiomes. They had a distinct microbiome for those two different types of Parkinson's. And I was like, that's it. I quit my job. I started funding research at the University of Chicago, looking at my husband's and my microbiome in time series. And about 6 months later, I founded the BioCollective to not just look at Parkinson's, but look at microbiomes across the population. Because what I also felt is we call these things like single diseases, but at a microbiome level, we are depleting microbes across the population, and it's just presenting with different symptom profiles in different people. And so we developed methods for collecting a robust and repeatable samples from home. And by samples, I mean a poop sample. So we had a home collection kit, and we built out a biobank, and did whole genome sequencing so we could look at what's there, what are the functions, and all of that was really early in the process. That was, 8 years ago that we were doing that. And then we started to look at the data because, data was really where my background was in looking at operations, and we could start to see these patterns. And from that, we're like, okay, how are we going to fix this? And we went along the process of isolating probiotic bacteria and building systems using computational modeling and the expertise of my chief scientific officer, Dr. Kano, of how to put together teams of microbes to actually do specific things to restore the internal ecosystem.
Wow, that's fascinating, Martha. Truly, truly fascinating. I mean, I have so many questions for you. I'm trying not to forget my questions. First of all, so let me just jump right to the last thing you said. Computational methods. So like I'm a software engineer. So I know, and I like science and everything, but to me it was always like, okay, here's biology. I did not like biology when I was in college because it seemed like a lot of memorization, and I was always like more like a logical kind of physics, more of a physics kind of guy actually. So, and now like I hear all this like compute. So how do you use computational methods to develop strains of bacteria? How is that? Can you explain that?
So, not to develop strains of bacteria, but we use something called a bioflux model, and I had a computational biologist who worked for me. You take all of the genomes. So, if we're going to build a working system of bacteria, we take all the genomes of each of the strains we're going to put into the system. And then we used a database from Argonne National Lab that is basically a huge database of all the wet lab data of different species of bacteria and the wet lab information about how those bacteria react to different media or substrates, so different sugar, different carbohydrates, different fats, and also how if they co-culture organisms, how they interact with each other. So it's a database of all the metabolic output and input that goes into a specific strain of bacteria. So you have that database and the genomes of the individuals, and then you build a model of how they work together as a team. So to sort of simplify that, if you're going to put together a basketball team or a football team, on a basketball team you need centers, forwards, and guards. So you have to put together a team that can work well together. And so what we did, of course, Dr. Kano joined us after we developed Sugar Shift, but he took the concept that we came up with, Sugar Shift, and then his deep knowledge of 30 years of microbial ecology, and then helped us look at all these other formulas out of his knowledge base. And then we would put together, so as an example, for Sugar Shift, I originally developed it for my husband because some research had shown that the sugar alcohol mannitol could stop the aggregation of the proteins in Parkinson's. And so I bought a little mannitol chemistry book and found how microorganisms can produce mannitol. A few of them can produce mannitol. Most of them actually consume it. And so we built this system, and then we put it in this computational biology model to show that it actually would produce mannitol for a longer period of time. And so then you can run the model for however many hours you want to run it for. So you can run it for 8 hours or 12 hours, and it's feeding what one strain of bacteria is producing in that period and what the other strains are consuming. So you can see how they cross feed each other and then what they produce over time.
Mm-hmm. So basically, if I understand it correctly, you set some kind of goal, like in this case, produce mannitol, right? And you say, okay, this bacteria A produces mannitol, but what does it need? And then you search for other bacteria that produces that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And possibly there's different paths that this could take. Is that more or less how it works?
That's more or less how it works, yes.
Wow. And so so basically it's so you're running through a bunch of like I guess combinations or permutations. It's like a combinatorics problem, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, awesome. This is so amazing. I want to learn this.
Yeah.
Um, okay, let me ask you another thing, like real quick. So you mentioned few things. So you when you realized this, that your husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and you realized how much the diet, our modern diet, has to do with it, and you had little kids at that time,
Oh
right? If
yes,
I
our two children were 2 and 4, and then I had a older child who was a teenager, 13.
So how did that? So did you? So did that? Did all that research that you did at that time? Did that change your perspective of how you're gonna feed your kids, and did that shock you? How what are we doing to our kids nowadays, and how do you deal with it?
Absolutely. And in fact, my kids sort of tease me now. They called me the food Nazi. Uh, and my husband has joked, I'm on no fun diet number, 20 or whatever. But we didn't have junk food in the house. We tried very hard not to have, any candy or sweets, no soft drinks, no juices, anything with those sugars. I read every label. I was looking for anything that would have glyphosate or Roundup residues. And that my knowledge and experience evolved over time. But what was really interesting is when our kids went to college, and so many of their friends had gut health issues and health problems, and they used to sort of tease me about being so vigilant about the food, but they actually made so many better choices when they went to college, and they could see how it had impacted their health in a better way than their friends' health. And then they would bring their friends to me. Oh, you need to talk to my mom. Or they would call me and say, oh, my friend's got this terrible gut problem. Mom, can you help? What can you do? And so it's made them much better educated and able to educate their friends and other people about the importance of what you're eating and how that's impacting your gut and your overall health.
Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for saying all this, because a lot of this stuff that my wife is a food Nazi, by the way, from day one. But I had not supported her as much as I should have, because I supported her to an extent, but I did not understand the depth of the problem, and I'm only understanding this now, 20 years later. But then I realized that people, like, I don't know what it takes, to make that shift in people's minds. They probably just need to hear it more and more and more from different sources. And I think that when they hear it from you, it's much more value than just me saying this, because I'm just repeating the information that I hear. But let me ask you another question real quick. So, because I'm also thinking about my own kids, my own family. So I understand. Okay, no junk food, no added sugar, no juice. I understand that. How about bread? So I also hear that bread is pretty much, it's refined. Even if it's sold, like, as Dr. Lastic says, even if they sell you whole bread, but they process it mechanically, so that in the end those sugars get absorbed. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's multiple things about bread that I've studied, and bread for me personally was the hardest thing to give up because I love a hearty slice of bread with butter on it. But so there's several things. So the wheat has been here in the States, and you'll often hear people who say they can go to Europe and eat the bread and not have a problem. But here in the States, wheat has been selected and or engineered for strains with higher gluten. They're shorter strains. The way they go through that whole process of plant selection and plant growth has an impact on what's in that wheat and how that wheat is when you work with it. And the bakers really wanted higher gluten, so they grew for higher gluten. But there's a protein in wheat, a heat shock protein, and this may be a little bit too technical, but there's something called molecular mimicry where things from plants can be very similar to something in our body, and it can create an immune reaction. And there is a protein in wheat called alpha crystalline that can create an immune reaction in addition to the gluten and gliadin. But I believe one of the bigger problems with the wheat is not even all of those things. It's the fact that the wheat is desiccated, that means dried at the end of harvest, using glyphosate or other organophosphates that can dry the crop quickly and evenly, so that they can harvest it faster and have less risk of, say, rain. And so they spray the whole field so that it browns evenly and immediately. And what happens when you do that is it has even more of the herbicide residues on the grain. And that's the case with about 60 different crops. So it's not just wheat. A lot of people like to eat hummus. The chickpeas are actually one of the crops that have the highest glyphosate residues from the harvest spraying.
Mm-hmm. Wouldn't you be able to buy organic, and that would potentially do away with that problem?
Theoretically, yes, but I actually need to do some research on this because I'm not sure that the organic rules actually apply at this what is considered post-harvest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How about, so
So
I'm completely ignorant in this area, so sorry for stupid questions. But how about rye bread? That's not wheat, right?
that's not wheat. I haven't really dug into what's happened with rye, but bread, just generally, the bread that's made here in the States is still very much a high sugar content. Often, the other thing that you should look at when you're looking at a loaf of bread is the ingredients that are put in the bread. I mean, like when I was a kid, the bread turned moldy if you didn't eat it in a
Mm-hmm.
relatively short period of time. Well, they have all these agents in there. Of course, if you're going to prevent mold, you're doing something that's antimicrobial,
Mm-hmm.
because mold is a microbe. There's something called calcium propionate that's added to most commercial loaves of bread, and I would expect that's probably in rye as well. And calcium propionate is something that can has some connection. There's another researcher I've talked to quite a bit who looks at autism and the food ingredients, and he believes there's a connection with the calcium propionate in the bread and sort of the brain on fire feeling. that
Hmm.
some kids with autism have.
Okay, okay, all right. So the general guidelines about the diet are pretty clear on me, but for me. But I'm curious on your thoughts. How do you taking all this, and also like let's throw even also fasting into it. And I also know that fasting helps. And I listened to one of your interviews. I know at one point it helped your husband as well. And but so taking this all these dietary ideas that we now have plus the fasting. Now let's apply it to kids. How do you apply it to kids? What do you change? So I know what to do for me. But for kids, there's always this thought like, well, come on, they need energy. Like that's the common idea. Like, come on, like I know I'm used to the idea that I don't need carbohydrates, added carbohydrates. I can get enough from the fruit. I can get enough from other food sources. But how about the kids? Do you make any exceptions for the kids? Are there any differences how you approach the kids at different ages?
Well, I mean, I would say I certainly don't do fasting, or I didn't do fasting with my kids, but I didn't really know about fasting. But if you think about kids and sort of how they are if they're really active and they're outside playing, like I grew up outside playing, my kids pretty much still played outside for most of the time growing up. When they're outside, they only come in and eat when they are actually hungry. They don't eat on a specific schedule. I mean, now we sort of pump food in them and they're sitting at home on video games and that walk into the refrigerator. But, one of the things I would say I saw as a problem as a parent when my children were young and playing on sports teams is this organization of bringing the team snack for the middle of the game, which was almost always something that contained fructose and Gatorade. Do not give your children Gatorade. If you want to give them electrolytes, make your own electrolytes. I mean, they won't like that though, but um, I mean, people would bring, fruit roll ups, bars, all these things that are spiking your kids' insulin. So, when you're making things for your kids, you want to make nutritious whole food snacks, carrot sticks, celery sticks with peanut butter in them, or, try to find and make food fun that is healthy with vegetables and, you know, whole fruit, not fruit juice. So if you
Yes.
want to give your kids fruit, give them a whole orange and have them eat the pulp and everything.
Um, two more questions, real quick. So real quick with the kids. So how do you deal with the psychological slash sociological aspect of it? Like they go to a birthday party and everybody is celebrating and everybody is in a good mood and they serve this beautiful birthday cake and you're being the food Nazi and you're being the enemy of the people and everybody's like, come on, what are you doing to a kid? What do you
Oh,
you you
I let them eat the cake. I mean, I did. They could eat the cake at the party.
Okay.
But what I educated them about is, what is the cake doing to you? And notice after you eat the cake, what do you notice about how you feel? So
Uh-huh.
you teach them to learn, okay, I want this and I eat it, but how do I feel after? Am I hyperactive? Do I get a headache? Do I like what does it do to my body? Then they start to see and learn because the the way food affects you isn't always immediate. And so you have to learn. I mean, that's also something over the years I would say with my kids if they didn't feel well. I would say, well, what did you eat yesterday? And we would deconstruct what they ate, and then they could start to connect. Oh, I did eat. I ate more, simple carbs yesterday, and that's why I don't feel well.
Mm-hmm. And second question, to follow up on what you said, do you have a recipe for electrolyte that how to replenish your electrolytes when you exercise?
Well, I do have a recipe for electrolytes, but I don't think most kids would like it.
Well, even for adults, like
But for
because
adults,
sometimes what I do real quick, so like I like intermittent fast, and I exercise, so I do judo in the middle of my fast, and I don't want to, just because of how my work schedule works, I sometimes I'm a slave of that. So, like ideally, maybe I should be exercising at the end of the fast, but sometimes I exercise in the middle of the fast, and I don't want to break the fast. But at the same time, I'm thinking, well, maybe my body needs electrolytes. I'm okay, but I'm always like, I'm not sure. Like, should I uh, drink some electrolytes? And if so, what's the best way to do it?
well, I have a couple different recipes. One, probably a kid would like better, is just a fresh squeezed orange in water with a little pinch of sea salt, mineral salt, and cream of tartar, which is actually potassium. And you
Hmm.
can mix that up. So, for a kid with the fresh orange juice, would taste pretty good. I also make it with apple cider vinegar, and I don't think a kid would love that. So, as an
Hmm.
alternative, apple cider vinegar also contains, if you take apple cider vinegar with the mother, it has a strain of bacteria in it called Acetobacter, and that particular strain of bacteria has been shown to be able to break down glyphosate.
Hmm. But in the first recipe you mentioned orange juice, but didn't we establish that juice is not good?
Well, I mean, we're not drinking a concentrated glass of orange juice. What we're doing is we're taking an orange and we're squeezing it into water, which is diluting it. So you're
Okay,
getting fresh, whole food vitamin C.
gotcha. And you just basically just take a little bit of salt, just like with your
Little pinch
fingertip,
of,
pinch
yep,
of salt.
see, yep, a pinch of salt and about I think it's a quarter teaspoon of the uh, cream of tartar.
Cream of tartar. Okay, I'll have to run this by my wife because I'm completely ignorant about food. I only know what it when something tastes good. I'm like, okay, I know how it tastes. I have no idea how to make it, but I'm gonna learn it because I'm so excited about all this probiotic stuff. I want to
Mm.
start making this. So let me ask you quickly about your company, BiotiQuest. So first of all, can you walk me through it? Like how did you uh did you like experiment by yourself at first? Like did you just try to use probiotics available in the store, or was it all like based on computational models and all that stuff? And how do you go about like even starting a company? You just call people up and say, hey, you know, how do you even do this? What's the like? Walk me through the process.
Well, if you recall, I started the research company, the Bio Collective, first, and we were collecting samples and doing computational modeling. And I attended a conference on Parkinson's and heard these researchers talking about how mannitol could stop the aggregation of the proteins. So when I came back and I read the book, the mannitol chemistry book, and I saw, there are microbes that it basically, the microbes that make mannitol use glucose and fructose. So I thought, wow, well, if you could put a system back in the body that could then use up that glucose and fructose that we're getting too much of in our diet and convert it to mannitol, which we don't really use and we would get rid of, that would be great. Well, I had an advisor to my research company who was a fermentation chemist and had worked for 20 plus years in the probiotics business. And so I sat down with him with this first concept of, can we make a formula to do this? And we came up with this 8-strain formula, and he had a lot of relationships in the industry, so he was working to get samples for us so that we could make it and try it on my husband. And in that process, like, one of the strains in our formula, or one of the species, is called Bacillus subtilis, and he was really having a hard time getting that. And he's like, well, does it have to have that? Can we take that out? And I said, no, it absolutely has to have that, because it has certain properties that I believe are very important for this. And so he was able to find Bacillus subtilis, which is really a key player. After we got our computational system, we saw if we took that organism out, it shifted the pH and changed the formula very much. Anyway, too much science there. But
No, that's great. This is great.
so we made a small batch of 100 bottles, and we gave it to my husband. And at the time, he was walking with a cane, and within about a month of taking the product, he was no longer walking with a cane, and we were testing his microbiome and seeing how it was changing. And we continued to do that for 120 days, and we could see how it was moving back closer and closer to the healthy human microbiome and the improvements on him. So I just started giving it away to other people to try, and people were like, "Oh, this makes me feel great. I can't tell you how good I feel." And so, I'll say it was a bit of a slow process. We first just started making it in a very small scale and just kind of selling it as a sideline on the BioCollective. And then really at the beginning of COVID, when we decided to move away from collecting fecal samples and doing all of that because of the risk, we had already modeled out 24 different formulas that we could address different specific things in the body, where that's sleep, immunity, heart health, mood and depression, hormone problems for women, like menopause. Anyway, we had 24 different formulas. And so we decided to take some of the money we got from the COVID funding to pivot the business. And we started out with 3 products, and we made a batch of those and did all of our branding and started to sell those online. And we were fortunate to be part of something called the Kick Sugar Summit. That was kind of our first introduction to the public, because one of the things that the Sugar Shift formula, this is the one I originally made for my husband, it actually helps with sugar cravings. So when people take it, they start to not want sugar as much. And so then we started to bring in, more of our products. So we now have 5 specific products in this one. And then we did a clinical trial last year in Cuba. My chief scientific officer was born in Cuba, so we were able to do one there at a hospital. And we did it in people with diabetes. And I think that's how you found me, was Dr. Davis was talking about our diabetes clinical trial and the results that we had in diabetes. And yesterday I was actually on a call looking at the microbiome data, because we're working on a paper for that, and we could see how the probiotic, we're not only putting in probiotic bacteria, but we're shaping the gut ecosystem to make it more friendly for a broader and better population of microbes. So we can see that the increase over time of diversity and more species that are known to be beneficial in the gut microbiome.
Mm-hmm.
But we're still young, we're still very small and a very young company, and we sell directly online and on Amazon. And then we do have more and more natural health practitioners recommend people our products. And I do have actually some neurologists who've learned about my work in Parkinson's who recommend the Sugar Shift probiotic for their Parkinson's patients as soon as they're diagnosed, because there's a long history of this is actually chronic constipation can precede a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease by 10 to 15 years. And so if you start to get on top of, if you have a problem with constipation and not being able to grow regularly, and you can get a good probiotic like Sugar Shift that can help you get regular again, maybe we turn back the tide of, people who get these chronic diseases because they're getting rid of the waste and the toxins that the body has to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Real quick, so first question, just curiosity and my complete ignorance in this. Where do you get, so I understand the computational model, but where do you get, so now the computational model, you got it figured out. Now you go to some kind of microbial bank to how do you get the strains?
So, this is one of the interesting things about probiotics. The vast majority of probiotics, when you go into a store or you look online, are coming from just 3 suppliers, basically. So there are 3 large companies that produce probably, I'm going to say, about 90% of the strains on the market. It may not be quite that large. And that's Danesco, which is owned by DuPont, Christian Hansen, and Probi, which is a Swedish company. And there are some other companies in Asia, but those are the big companies that sell into the U.S. supplement market. So we actually built out a bank of our own strains of bacteria, studied those, got their genomes, selected for the specific genetics. And in fact, one of our strains of bacteria that's in all of our formulas is a Lactobacillus plantarum that can break down glyphosate to carbon, phosphate, and water. And many strains of bacteria break it down into something that's actually more toxic. But anyway, we got our own strains and started building out a bank, and then found a fermentation company in Wisconsin that actually grows those strains for us at scale. And then we take our own strains, and we do use some strains from other manufacturers and combine those using those genomes into our computational model to make sure it's doing what we want. And then we send all those strains to basically an encapsulation company that blends the mixture and puts them in capsules and bottles them for us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so another 2 questions. So me personally, it takes for me a while to trust some, why should I, it all sounds so good, but okay, we're so used to okay, this got to be approved by some kind of authority like FDA or whatever. Not that we also can doubt that as well. So 2 questions, I guess, there, is there some kind of authority that kind of blesses your approves your product? And number 2, just for people, just from forget that authority, how do you trust, and not just necessarily you, how do you distinguish, how do you go about this? Because anybody can try to sell any kind of stuff, and like you said, some bacteria could potentially be be bad for you, right? Or maybe they're not tested enough. Maybe they have side effects. How do you navigate that?
Sure. So probiotics fall under a regulation with the FDA. It's called DSHEA. It's the dietary supplement. I forget what all the other letters are, but they do fall under the FDA, but they're regulated by something essentially called generally regarded as safe. So different species of bacteria or strains of bacteria that have long use, known to be in food, are what are called generally regarded as safe. So if you can show evidence that your strain of bacteria has been in food for a long time, and there have been no adverse effects, then it's generally regarded as safe. And that applies to a lot of different food ingredients as well, and nutritional supplements.
So
So
on the bottle that you sell, there's some kind of label that says generally regarded as safe from FDA or something?
there's a label, but it does not say generally regarded as safe. That's a designation that strains of bacteria have, and there's a long document that you have. So if you're buying from a commercial company, they have these in their files. They're GRAS documents. For our own strains, we have written these documents and had them reviewed by outside people, where you go through all the literature about a strain. I mean, I'll give you an example. One of the strains that we use in our formulas is called Leuconostoc mesenteroides. You often don't see it in probiotics, but it is worldwide one of the strains that is found in many, many fermented foods. And so, there's a lot of research around the safety of this strain and its use in food production for fermented foods and being found in fermented foods. And so, you look at the genome of the strain. Does it carry any antibiotic resistance genes? So you don't want any antibiotic resistance genes. So there's steps in the process that you look at to establish that your strain is safe and has been in the food supply without any adverse problems. So that's sort of how that process works. But there is not anything in like the FDA does not go through a specific approval process for supplements. Supplements fall under GRAS, and so the company goes through this process, or the manufacturer of a strain goes through this process of establishing that something is GRAS.
So me as a regular person, as a regular consumer, I have a company X and a company Y, and they both want to sell me their probiotic, and I'm excited about both of them. Is there any way at all I could tell which one is safe, which one potentially not safe, or is it just do the research, do the best you can, and what
What I would say is probiotics in general are generally safe. Very rarely would you find a probiotic on the market that doesn't have a safe strains in it. You might find some that are newer to the market, but for the most part, the strains of bacteria that are used in probiotics have a very, very long safety history. So I would say you don't have a lot of concern about safety, but if you're looking, if you're pregnant or breastfeeding or anything like that, you should probably ask your doctor or show them this is what I want to take. But there
Mhm.
are, there's a probiotic that's now made for newborn babies called Avivo,
Mhm.
that, there's lots of research behind. Um,
Mhm.
and then I would say you have to try it and see how you feel. But often when you first start taking a probiotic and it's changing your internal ecosystem, you may have a week where you first start to take it where you kind of like feel some gut disruption,
Mhm.
because it's kind of knocking out the bad guys and bringing in a new team. And when you do that, you can have a little kerfuffle.
Cool. So can you briefly go over your products and I already know the sugar shift. Well, actually, I have a question about that. So, like, if let's say I don't eat sugar, I stopped eating sugar. Should I still take sugar shift? And if so, how does that work? Uh,
That's a question I've gotten more recently, because I talk to a lot of people who have been low carb or keto for a long time, and they're still having blood sugar issues. What many people do not realize is we make sugars in our body. And in particular, we make fructose when we're under stress. And of course, we're all under stress. We're all under stress, environmental stress, nutritional stress, psychological stress. We're like in this high pressure stress situation that's only been made worse for the last 3 years. And so you're endogenously producing fructose.
mhm.
And fructose is probably the most poisonous sugar for the body. So yes, I say anybody would benefit from taking Sugar Shift long term. It restores a balance in the ecosystem and the metabolism of the body. It's putting back B vitamin production, and it's what we're working on in the paper from our clinical trial is how it's making the microbiome more efficient for nutritional access, I'll say, and production that makes our host metabolism more efficient,
Mhm.
provides us with better energy.
Cool. And can you? So I'm sure we can go on the website. I'm sure there's a. I haven't checked it out yet, but biotiquest.com. I'm guessing.
Yes,
I'm pretty,
biotiquest.com.
so I'm pretty sure we can go and look at the details. But can you briefly also tell about your other products, and also let's address, like, most of my listeners and myself and my kids. Uh, we're mostly concerned with like athletic performance. So all different aspects of athletic performance. One question, so performance, that's one thing. Another question in particular is some people want to build muscle just but while maintaining their athletic performance. And like the standard recommendation is like, oh, just take those protein shakes. And I always kind of like, even though I didn't know much about it, there's something wrong with that. And then recently I heard Dr. William Davis talk about, I forgot, is it L-Reuteri or something like that, the strain that's found in kefir, I guess, right? uh, Maybe I'm wrong, so correct me please if I am. But he was mentioning how it just helps you increase your
Muscle
your
mass.
muscle mass. So can you go over your different products and kind of say what if specifically address if any of the people that just want to improve their performance, build muscle mass, what should they take?
So there's two strains with um, this muscle building properties, that is pretty well documented. Um, Bacillus subtilis, which is in all of our products, is, they have clinical evidence of building muscle mass and research on performance athletes. You can look that product up. It's Deerland DE111 is the Bacillus subtilis that we use. And that's in all of our products. We also have the L-Reuteri in many of our products, not all of them. So we have the Sugar Shift product, which is a great product for overall metabolic health for anyone who's got sugar cravings, or any kind of glucose dysregulation. That's the one I made for my husband with Parkinson's. We have a product called Ideal Immunity it has a particular strain of bacteria that's really excellent at killing foodborne pathogens or anything that's kind of caused a GI disruption. So if you get food poisoning, if you are going on foreign travel, it's a great product to take with you for protection, when you're going to a different country and you're going to be eating things that you're not used to. We have a product called Heart Centered that helps with nitric oxide production and overall cardiovascular health. So that actually might be a nice product for an athlete that is just looking to support their cardiovascular system. We have a product for restoring the gut ecosystem after antibiotics. That's called Antibiotic Antidote. And that actually came about because some research came out on a particular mixture of strains of bacteria that was detrimental after taking antibiotics in the research. And when we looked at it, and Dr. Kano looked at it, he said, well, I wouldn't give people that anyway because it's going to make the system too acidic. And so we went back with our computational model and his knowledge and built the antibiotic antidote to try to help. Because so many people either take antibiotics preventatively for dental work, or especially with kids, they get an ear infection, and they hand it out like candy. Antibiotics are an important tool, but we shouldn't be sort of taking them like candy.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have one for sleep called Simple Slumber that helps support the production of melatonin and tryptophan in the gut, and improve the quality of sleep. And then we're actually just getting ready to release a starter culture where you can make yogurt. I mean, many people make yogurt with all of our formulas. They just open the capsules and use them as the culture starter. But we specifically, for Dr. Davis's group of people who make yogurt from our mixture, we're launching next week a starter culture where it's just a scoop, so it's easier. People don't have to open up the capsules, and they can make yogurt with it. And when you make yogurt with these capsules, I mean, technically the term yogurt only applies to a commercial product that has Strep thermophilus and Lactobacillus bulgaricus in it, I think. You can culture milk with lots of different strains of bacteria. You just, like if it was a commercial product, you wouldn't be able to call it yogurt, but all of Dr. Davis's people call it yogurt, and it tastes and looks like yogurt. It's a cultured milk with these strains of bacteria.
Mm-hmm. How much mileage can you get out of just like doing like some kind of homemade recipes of just making making homemade yogurt, kefir, kombucha, Kvas? So this is this? So I'm guessing you can get a lot of benefit, but I'm guessing that the product that you sell, it might have something else that you don't necessarily get in those homemade product, or do you?
Well, I actually recommend, and I have some videos actually that came out I think they're on our blog this week, on how to make homemade beet kvass, something called
I saw that.
fire cider, and the other one is a ginger bug.
Mm-hmm.
So some of those are natural. I make the beet kvass by you add whey to the product, and so I'm using a whey that comes from yogurt that I've made with my sugar shift, but
Mm-hmm.
you can use whey from a commercial yogurt as well. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I
So
think it's a good combination of both, but certainly some of the things like our plantarum that breaks down the glyphosate, I do think that that is one of the reasons why um, it helps people so much. And also the reuteri, which you don't find in a lot of probiotics. The reuteri has I mean, I get deeper and deeper into the science and research on that thanks to Dr. Davis, who's really kind of sent me down that. That Lactobacillus reuteri signals the body or helps support the body to make more oxytocin, and that is the feel good love hormone. And so, why would we not want more oxytocin?
I listened to Dr. William Davis. He's such an authentic guy. You know, I just love him. And he got me, like, when he described, he says, "Can I say something embarrassing?" in one of his videos, and he describes, like, after taking L-Reuteri, he has
Yes.
this, like, vivid dream, and, like, this woman that he feels the like affection for, and then it lasts into the day, and it's just like the way he describes this, I'm like, well, I wanna try some of that stuff. This is so. Which one of your formula has L-Reuteri?
Well, Sugar Shift has it. Actually, I should have these memorized off the top of my head, but I
You said,
don't.
didn't you say, like, next week it's kind of something is coming out, or was I am I getting being confused?
The yogurt starter culture is coming out.
Mhm.
Um, the Ideal Immunity does not have the reuteri. Uh, I'm like looking all over my countertop where I have my goodies sprinkled about. Um,
Well, I'm pretty sure your website has all those
yeah, you
ingredients.
can look at the labels. I think it's the heart centered and the heart centered, the simple slumber, and the sugar shift or what have the reuteri. I can't see. Or anyway,
Mhm.
sorry, I should know those off the top of my head, but I don't know
No,
them
no
off.
worries. We can always go to the website and do the research. So this is cool. Let me ask you, m- uh, for the home. So, like, I'm like excited. I want to try making all kinds of fermented foods at home. And I've never done this before. Should I? And at first it's like, well, how do I know? Like, okay, so I follow the recipe. Okay, so you leave this. How do I tell, like, this is a good fermented food from this is like spoiled food? Because a lot of the recipes sounds like basically you put the food and you let it spoil, right? And a lot of times, honestly, like, spoiled food is like, it actually, in fermented food, they smell similarly. And alcohol is also fermented, for fermentation. Like, how do I navigate this? How do I know what's good, what's bad, how much is too much?
Well, I'm certainly not the best expert. There is a book called The Art of Fermentation, um, that's has lots of great information about it. But most of the time, like, I can tell if it's you can tell by if something grows on the top of it that looks like like a
Mold?
mold, or that's either a greenish thick type mold, or something that's black. Obviously, you don't want to have something, but like my beet kvass, when I make my kvass, it's sitting on the countertop for 3 days. And at the end of that 3 days, I can see that it is fizzy. So it's got the CO2 production from the fermentation process. There's nothing black growing on it. And then I put it in the refrigerator. So my fire cider, that's fermented for 6 weeks. But I've never had an issue with my fire cider. Now I make my own sauerkraut, and I threw out a batch of sauerkraut, like a whole giant stone fermenting cask of sauerkraut, because it had a black film growing on top of it. And it was like,
Mm-hmm.
now I'm sure I probably could have scraped off the top inch or two and everything down below it where it had been more anaerobic, sorry,
Mm-hmm.
that didn't have oxygen, would have been better. But I didn't want, I had enough sauerkraut. I didn't want to take that risk. So.
Mm-hmm. So real quick, alcohol is a product of fermentation. Does that have any type of alcohol has any life culture, or is it? And is there any chance that any alcohol it could be good for you, or maybe the science will still discover something about that? What is your take on that?
Well, what's interesting is mannitol. So anything that ends in an OL is an alcohol based molecule.
I remember
And
that.
mannitol is an alcohol. It's a sugar alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get drunk from mannitol, but alcohols are solvents. And so there are many molecules that have an OL on them that move things around in plants and humans. When we're talking about alcohol, we're talking about ethanol, which is a different product. And you probably don't want to be drinking too much ethanol.
Mm-hmm.
But even that in the body, in the microbes in our body, that biochemistry is going on all the time. What you don't want to do is be fermenting ethanol in your body, which can happen if you eat a lot of carbs that are highly processed. You can feed that into your gut, and actually you can be making an ethanol fermentation in your gut.
Mm-hmm. But let's just make it. I'm pretty sure that the answer is no. But does any alcohol that we consume, beer, wine, does it have any probiotic effects? Does it have any life culture, or is it just purely ethanol?
Uh, I don't know what the end processing. I would think most wines probably still have some live cultures in them, and the same would be true of beers. I don't think they kill off the yeast. I think the bigger problem is there's probably not nearly as much diversity in those industries now as there was, say, 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're losing diversity, because people used to, ferment their own wine, ferment their own beer. They made their own wine and their own beer with wild cultures that were, from their area.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're inoculating with very specific things, and most of the beer is very commercial. Most of the wine is very commercial.
Mm-hmm. Right. But hypothetically speaking, there is still a chance that there's going to be research that's going to say, well, actually, if this is the right kind of wine and the right kind of beer, homemade, whatever, hypothetically, a little bit is maybe beneficial. Or is that completely ruled out by science now?
I'm not your expert on that, so I'm not going to really
Okay.
make a comment one way or another. I think there's research on both sides of the equation, and what I
Hmm.
would just say is look at who's paying for the research. When you read research, go all the
Hmm.
way back to the original. Don't just read the headline, go all the way
Hmm.
back to the original research paper and see who paid for the research, and then you'll know. But I'm sitting here drinking my coffee. Coffee is something that has a lot of down through history, a lot of microbes and fermentation. But the commercialization of our food supply, many things are irradiated, and so it kills off those organisms. Our
Hmm.
food that used to come locally
Hmm.
didn't have so much what they call safety protocols, but those safety protocols are
Right.
killing microbes, in the name of safety, in the name of preservation and having the food last longer or something. And so we're not getting live organisms on our produce and in products that are in that large scale commercial side chain,
Hmm.
supply chain. So if you're buying from a local farmer's market, you're likely to get more diversity
Hmm.
in your microbe.
I just think that it's so interesting that in general, like our society has become so like sterile, because and maybe like unintentionally with good intentions, right? Because we think, well, these infections make us sick, so let's try to prevent them. So people are obsessed with washing hands, washing everything. And not, when I was growing up as a kid, you would drink from the same bottle. That was like normal. And if you didn't, you were like, also I grew up in Soviet Union. That may be different. So, but if you didn't, it was like, you're like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
And then now it's like, okay, well, you shouldn't do that. And then you should wash your hands all the time. And okay, I'm all for that. But I think there may be a downside to that. Just like with COVID, we saw like I'm for masks. I understand why people need to wear masks to protect other people, but I think we now see that there were down the line there was some problems with that because we need an exchange of bacteria. What are your thoughts on that?
So there has been quite a bit of research on what's called the hygiene hypothesis, and that in Western societies that are highly sterile, that where we're living in these urban environments and we're washing and cleaning and using all these sanitizers, that our immune systems are not as well trained. And so there's lots of research you can look at on the hygiene of a hypothesis and how that may be contributing to the higher levels of certain chronic diseases in Western societies, and the rise in autoimmune disease as well.
I think I also read a lot of research about at some point C-sections became very popular, and I think they might be still popular, especially in Brazil.
Yes.
Because and it's like on the surface, especially for me, like as a man, it's like sounds like, oh, this is just like so much easier. You schedule the thing. It's all control. And it just like on the surface, it's like sounds better. But then, and of course, I learned that from a woman's perspective, it's not better at all. And then I'm learning that the baby gets all the bacteria that it gets from the birth canal, that it carries, apparently like carries the baby carries it through life. And then the breast milk, that's another thing. uh, when my first kid was born 20 years ago, the pediatrician actually recommended, said, like I forgot, it was like 6 months. They said that's it, no more breast milk, 6 months. That was actually a recommendation from a pediatrician. And my wife was, she's very, she's a food Nazi. She's a nature freak, and so she was resisting that. And she was like trying to like natural birth, like breastfeeding as long as you can. But the pediatrician actually recommended that stuff. And then with our subsequent kids, there's like, no, please breastfeed as long as possible. There's so many benefits that we just learning now.
It's kind of crazy how our medical system has affected the whole process of having a baby, which women have done for centuries without all this medical intervention, and stepped in and said, "Oh, let's take away the pain. Let's stop this. Let's make artificial milk. Let's do blah blah blah," and how all of these little impacts have changed the health of our subsequent generations. Breast milk is very important for establishing colonies of bifidobacteria in newborns and young children, and that's a very important species of bacteria for our immune system. And it's also bifidobacteria are lower in people who have poor outcomes in COVID. They're also lower in people with Parkinson's. And so, bifidobacteria is very important. And that's the place where you first get it is through the breastfeeding process with mom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Last question that I just thought of. We spoke about, different, like alcohol and different homemade recipes. How about sourdough bread? So we know bread. We established bread is bad, but then sourdough. I mean, it has this idea that it has life culture. You can make it at home. What are your thoughts on that?
I think if you are going to eat bread, doing a long cultured sourdough. So I have a recipe for a Mediterranean bread that takes 3 days. You're making it with essentially wild yeast from the air. Or, I mean, you can add a sourdough starter, but you are doing that over a 3-day process. So you have these microbes that are, I'm going to say, breaking down and cleaning up the grains. And even if you go back historically, cultures were not eating grains the way we were. They soaked their grains. They would even soak the grains before they ground them to make bread. So there's a lot of processes that for convenience. I mean, who wants to take 3 days to make a loaf of bread? But honestly, that's the best loaf of bread I've had, is this Mediterranean country bread that takes 3 days of fermenting the dough before you ever cook it.
I just want to mention something, and correct me if I'm wrong, but also I want to clarify it for anybody who doesn't know. Sometimes it seems like a little bit of a contradiction because we say no sugar, no sugar, no sugar. But then when you make all these fermented foods, you put the sugar. But I think the idea is that that sugar is the food for the bacteria, microbes. So by the time you consume it, it doesn't have or barely has any
has
sugar.
very little sugar. I will say that, like something like kombucha, a lot of people think, "Oh, kombucha, it's great for me," but you really need to look at the bottle, because these big commercial kombuchas are adding sugar after the fermentation process. So you have to look at what the added sugars are, because when you do a home fermentation, over the period of time, the microbes are using up all the sugars and producing other metabolites. But in these commercial products, they have added sugar at the end to make them sweeter. When you make it at home, it's often less sweet, I'll say.
Okay, so one more question then. Let's say I take this commercial kombucha which has added sugar, but hypothetically speaking, it also has the life culture. And let's say I open it and I just let it sit on my table for a couple of days. Is there a chance the life culture is going to eat that added sugar and I'm going to actually have a good product?
Hadn't really thought about that, but yeah, I would say over the course of several days, it would eat up that sugar. the live cultures in there should theoretically eat up that sugar.
Would you recommend I try that?
You could give it a try. I don't know how you would really know without doing how much of the sugar has actually been. I mean, I
All
guess
right,
you
I'll
could
taste it.
taste it before and taste it a couple of days later and see if it's less sweet.
Because I think the recipe for like homemade kombucha that I saw is that take a kombucha from the store, make sure it's a good one, and then pour it in a whatever, add some sugar, and let it sit for a few weeks, and now you have a homemade kombucha.
And you get a Scoby on the top, that's
Kobe,
one
yeah.
thing when people make homemade kombucha, they're often a little shocked because the microbes make what's called a polysaccharide, and they basically make a film, which the longer you have your Scoby, the thicker it can get. So it's like this rubbery thing that floats on the top.
What is Scoby? Is that a word or is it an acronym?
Scoby, Scoby. I don't know if Scoby is an acronym. I just know that that the blob in the kombucha
So
is called
so so
Scoby.
so so you when you make you take kombucha, you add sugar, add tea, let it sit, it forms a Scoby, and then you use that Scoby to make future kombuchas.
Yes.
Is that you? And then
Yeah,
you drink,
you have to feed your Scoby.
you feed it with sugar.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Cool. But what if you don't feed it? Can it like can you keep it like in the refrigerator for a few months and then you decide to make one again and then you start feeding it? Or you have quantity?
I don't think you can keep it like that. And I'm not a Scoby expert, and the other thing I would say is you do have to be careful with kombuchas with getting wild organisms that can grow in there. I have heard of incidents where you can have an unhealthy Scoby that's producing toxins.
When you mean wild, it's just something that comes from the environment.
Yeah, I mean, there's microbes in the air.
Hmm. So
So,
how do you prevent that? How do you know?
I mean, there really is no way to know without doing some
Experiment.
isolation and sequencing of what's in your Scoby.
Hmm. Thank you so much. This is I apologize for keeping you for such a long time.
Yeah.
Last question. How's your husband doing now?
He's doing very well. Um, he does a lot of work in terms of his diet, his exercise. Exercise has a huge impact on Parkinson's. They've shown that aerobic exercise, cycling, boxing can have great benefits for Parkinson's. So he is involved in groups and actually helped set up cycling groups all across the United States to
Hmm.
help people with Parkinson's. He's very cognizant of his diet and what he's putting in his body. And he also does breathing exercises. He does Qigong to work with electrical flow in the body, lots of different things. But he's had it for 20 years, and most people are shocked that he's had it for 20 years when they see him.
By the way, I forgot to mention I so much relate to your story because in Soviet Union when my brother was born, he was very sick, and at that time they later when we moved here, he was diagnosed with spina bifida. But back in the day, they had no idea, and they basically said like you said something like they said with your husband like good luck,
Right.
like you're on your own. And my parents were pediatricians in Soviet Union, and my mom just used her knowledge from medical school combined with just her intuition and just her own research, just to keep. And that was terrible, because those people in Soviet Union, those the people that were like outcast, and they just like, at worst you die, at best you are like outcast from the society. You cannot do anything. And that's like a whole other story. But I can relate so much like to your story of how it's just like out of desperation you go and you do your research, and it's maybe at the time it's like, well, like it's like you kind of maybe dismiss it, like maybe I would dismiss my mom's research, but then it's like, wow, this is like top notch research, you know.
Yes, I tell people all the time the answers are already out there. You have to dig through the research and understand the problem you're looking at. But I think many of the answers are already there. And what I really hope, I mean, you can't stop AI, that it can be used for good, to see that the answers are already hiding in the research, and we just need to connect the dots.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times we have the answers in our heads, but we have to learn to both listen to the facts, to the science, but also listen that, like, don't just try, don't just go based on the intuition, but don't completely discard it. It has a value.
Right.
And I think also we have a problem of just like, maybe we're afraid to go out of our comfort zone. So sometimes, like, deep inside we know something is good, but then we make excuses and rationalizations for not doing what we know is good for us, like sugar being an example. Okay,
Right.
everybody probably knows that it's not good, but then they'll say, well, if I tell my kid not to eat sugar, then they're going to want sugar even more. This is an argument I hear a lot. And I'm
Right.
like, well, okay, go ahead and try that logic with cigarettes and beer.
Well, one of the things I did with my kids, or so my in I think it was like junior high, or it must have been high school. So my son came home, and he never my youngest son was never really a sweet tooth kind of a kid, because he grew up not. But he had stopped at Sonic and gotten a small, I forget what their thing is called. It's like a slushy type thing. And so I looked up online how much sugar is in one of those. And then I took that and converted it into teaspoons. And then I went to my cabinet and I got sugar out. And I took that number of teaspoons and put it in a bowl and walked over to him and I said, "Here, you want to eat this?" And he said, "Gross. No." I said, "That's what you're drinking right now, that amount of sugar." So when you can translate the food for a child into this visual of a bowl of sugar, they don't want to eat a bowl of sugar. And so when you start to translate for them how much of that sugar is in what they're eating, then they can start to understand, okay, how, like, it's hiding.
Mm-hmm.
It's hiding. Yeah.
That's awesome, Martha. Thank you so much. I apologize for keeping you so long. I hope this is we're gonna talk again at some point in the future. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I think you're a great person, and you're doing a lot of great stuff. And I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.